Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way.
Today we're going to be talking about personality disorders. What is a personality disorder? An enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from the expectations of the individual's culture, is pervasive and inflexible, has an onset in adolescence and early adulthood, is stable over time, and leads to distress and impairment. This area is the most misdiagnosed of any area that there is. What's interesting about it is that they didn't change the criteria for this, but we're going to see they've come up with a whole new method of dealing with this later on. And in DSM-4, this was on Axis 2, but we don't have axes anymore, so these are all blended together now. That's just the way it works. So let's look at their definition again and look at the different pieces of it. First, what is personality? An enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior displayed by an individual. How do we get personality? As you grow up, you learn to cope with life. And you learn to cope with life in different ways, and that is your personality. One of the things that I read said they suggest that 80% of your personality is set by age 8. So we have all of these things that affect us as to how we cope with life. It affects every aspect of the person's life. They're among the most difficult to treat. That's one of the reasons many times we try not to give a personality disorder if we have something else that might be more short-term. They're long-standing, as it said, it begins before adulthood. They do not have periods of remission. You don't have a person going along and their personality is like this, and then all of a sudden they're acting like this, or what do we have? Dissociative identity disorder dealing with, which you could have possibly. They do not vary greatly in intensity. If you have someone that's all over the place and now they're calm, that's probably not a personality disorder. That probably is something like a manic episode that they were going through. They do not improve over time. They're divided into 3 clusters. The first cluster, that's called cluster A, means they're odd and eccentric. Cluster B, they're dramatic, emotional, or erratic. Cluster C, they're anxious or fearful. So we're going to look at all of those, and as I said, they didn't change the criteria this time. Now they reworded it all, which didn't really change the criteria, and then they came up with an alternate way of looking at these things, but that is not applicable at this time. It might be in later renditions of DSM-5, but it is not right now. So the first personality disorder that we're going to look at is the paranoid personality disorder. Now, where could we get this confused? How about when we're dealing with psychosis? There used to be a paranoid type of schizophrenia. They don't have those anymore. It has all been grouped together, but you could get confused with that kind of a situation. 4.4%, so this is pretty high, of the population in a given year might be dealing with a paranoid personality disorder. Few of them come to treatment. They're inappropriately suspicious and distrustful of others. They're vigilant against threats, resistant to external authority. They're edgy, jealous, impulsive, quick to react to danger or threats. Here's the criteria. A pervasive distrust or suspiciousness of others such that their motives are interpreted as malevolent, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by at least 4 of the following. Suspicious without sufficient basis that others are exploiting, harming, or deceiving them. They're occupied with unjustified doubts of loyalty or trustworthiness of friends or associates. Reluctance to confide in others. perception of hidden meaning or threatening contact into benign remarks or events. Persistent bearing of grudges. Perceives attacks on character or reputation that are not apparent to others and is quick to react angrily or to counterattack. Reoccurrent suspicious without justification regarding fidelity of the spouse or the sexual partner. It's not solely in the context of psychotic disorder or due to a mental condition. What do you think about this? Are these people going to come to counseling? If they come to counseling, what are they going to do? They're going to take everything you have and turn it around, and they're going to be suspicious of you. And they're going to be afraid of you. And you're going to have an ongoing conflict and power struggle in that counseling session. So these are going to be very hard to treat, aren't they? So what are the guesses of what causes this? And I'm saying guesses because in most of these personality disorders, it's nothing that is really clear. That's why they're so hard to diagnose and so hard to treat. Demanding, rejecting parents. Rejection leads to overvigilance, to danger or rejection. Projection of hostility on others. Set of strategies to combat feelings of humiliation, shame, or inadequacy. See, if I feel inadequate, that I can't measure up, what would be the best strategy? I blame it all on you. It's because of the way you're treating me. It's because of all the things that you're doing. And you're against me. How much are they going to reveal in therapy? Very little, if anything. So they get to be very interesting that way. Treatment. Drug therapy is ineffective. Find the underlying anger or anxiety or family experience and confront them that way, but you need to confront them nicely, don't you? So theophostic or systematic desensitization. Help them learn to deal effectively with problems. Help them to more effectively interpret others' interpretations. Help them confront the unreality of their delusions by accepting them. How is love and grace going to work in a situation like this? Great. If you can help them not to have to perform. See, there's deep down issues here, but these are very set in the person. So that's why it's very hard to change. Help them trust God for protection. Develop a trusting therapeutic alliance, probably is the most important thing. What if you're the first person in the world that they've ever trusted? Develop healthy, trusting relationships, group therapy for trusting relationships if they'll go. But again, what are they going to be? Suspicious of all the rest of the people in the group, and they're going to be very defensive, aren't they? So that's the first one. Second one is called the schizoid personality disorder. This is 3.1 to 4.9%, so it's fairly high. Fears he cannot meet the needs, so denies the needs. Lack of social contact because they prefer to be alone. Now we're going to have another one almost exactly like this, so I want to warn you. This one prefers to be alone, okay? Withdrawal and lacks feelings for others. Passive and unable to receive reinforcement for themselves or others. Avoids all forms of overstimulation. What are the criteria? A pervasive pattern of detachment from social relationships and a restrictive range of expression of emotions in interpersonal settings, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by at least 4 of the follows. Do you see the pattern? These are persistent. We always go through that set, and then we have a particular set of criteria. Neither desires nor enjoys close relationships, including those of even their family. Nearly always preferred solitary activities. Has little interest in sexual activity. Enjoys few activities, if any. Has no close friends or confidants except relatives. Appears indifferent to the praise and criticism of others. Emotionally cold, detached, or flat in effect. Not a psychotic disorder and not caused by a medical condition. Etiology, what causes this? defense against the need for social contact, loyalty toward abusive parents, resulting in low self-esteem rather than anger, childhood marked by traumas, inability to give and receive love, cannot achieve self-esteem, self-affirmation, self-confidence, or belonging, suffering from an unintegrated self, that they are unsure of who they are and are unable to relate to others, profound vagueness and poverty of thoughts, can't scan the environment effectively or perceive accurately. Children have developmental delays in language, education, and motor functioning. So do you see the picture? What's the picture look like? This person doesn't really want to be around other people, doesn't really react to the world very well. They're sort of bland, and they're just sort of not there. Treatment. They have little interest in initiating treatment. More treatable than the paranoid type, however. Hard to maintain close relationships and move rapidly in relationships, exposure to fear, social skills, teaching emotions, group therapy. All of those type of areas you might be able to help them. But probably going to do better here in group therapy with this type than you are with the paranoid type. And now we have the other one that I said you have to be careful and not get confused. Schizotypal personality disorder. 0.6 to 4.6, basically a fear of rejection, handicapped in all interactions with others, including acute discomfort in close relationships. Cognitive or perceptual distortions or behavior eccentricities. Feel intensely lonely. What's the difference here? The other ones didn't want to be close. These want to be close, but they're afraid of being close, and they're very lonely, so they desperately want relationships, but they're afraid of the relationships. Do you see the difference between the schizoid and the schizotypal type here? Criteria. Pervasive pattern of social or interpersonal deficits marked by acute discomfort with and reduced capacity for close, as well as cognitive or perceptual distortions and eccentricities of behavior, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by at least 5 of the following. Ideas of reference which are not delusions. They think other people are talking about them. Odd beliefs or magical thinking that influence behavior inconsistent with cultural norms, including superstitions, belief in clairvoyance, telepathy, a second sense. In childhood, it could be bizarre fantasies and preoccupations, unusual perceptions or body illusions, odd thinking or speech, superstitious or paranoid ideation. Now think about this again. What could we have here? This person could seem like they're the paranoid type, couldn't they? Because we have that paranoid ideation along with these other issues. Inappropriate and constricted affect or emotions, behavior or appearance odd, eccentric, peculiar, lack of close friends or confidants other than first-degree relatives, excessive social anxiety that is not diminished with familiarity and tends to be associated with paranoid fears rather than negative self-image. Not psychotic, mood or pervasive development disorder. So what do you think about that? What's this person going to look like? Ever meet somebody that's just sort of off and they're sort of odd? They're sort of desperate for relationships, but they're afraid of the relationship, so they sort of stay away from other people, but they come across just very eccentric or very odd. See, a lot of these aren't the very big issues that we're seeing earlier. A lot of these are just, it's just their personality. That's just what they're like. And that's how these are different from the rest of them that we're talking about here. Etiology. Performed poorly on tests of attention like those in schizophrenia. Also higher dopamine in enlarged ventricles of the brain. However, linked to relatives with mood disorders. Treatment. Help connect with the world. Address boundary problems. Preventing further isolation. Easing loneliness. Accentuating strengths. Avoid overstimulation. Self-awareness of feelings, Teach to evaluate thoughts by objective evidence rather than emotions. Teach to disregard inappropriate thoughts and refrain from acting on them. Social skills and case management. Antipsychotics sometimes in low doses actually help. What's mostly going to be the treatment here? You relating to them and you developing that relationship with them and maybe help them to get a few friends and so on. It's going to be a slow process as you go forward. Now we're going to cluster B. And we're going to probably one of the biggest ones, that's the biggest problem that you get in the news all the time, antisocial personality disorder. This is a very self-centered person, but we're going to find that we have other ones that are also very self-centered. So how are you going to define this from the other ones? So that's always the confusion here. Maybe a person can qualify for 2 or 3 of these as you're looking at them based on their criteria. Pattern of violence, criminal or unethical exploitive behavior, and the inability to feel affection for others. Now there's a whole list of things that were in DSM-4, which is very interesting, that are not in DSM-5. Again, instead of the very specific boxes we had in DSM-4, they've expanded these out and actually lowered the criteria. Let me give you an idea what DSM-4 looked like here a little bit, and then we'll just see. These are not in DSM-5 anymore. But the list they used to have were frequent bullying and threatening, starts fights, use a weapon that could cause serious injury, physical cruelty to people, physical cruelty to animals, engaged in theft with confrontation like armed robbery and extortion, mugging, purse snatching, forcing sex upon somebody, deliberately sets fires, deliberately destroys property, breaks into buildings, cars, or houses, stole valuables, before age 13 stayed out all night against parents' wishes, ran away overnight twice, and truancy before age 13. So do you see how that was more specific? Now let's look at the DSM-5 criteria. By the way, is this somebody you're going to like to meet? Do you think you might have to be careful counseling somebody that deals with issues like this? Here's the DSM-5 criteria. Pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of rights of others occurring since age 15 in or at least 3 of the following. Behavior with grounds for arrest. Lies, uses alias or cons others for gain or gratification. Impulsive and does not plan ahead. Irritability and aggression through recurrent physical fights or assaults. Recklessly disregards safety of others. Irresponsibility in employment or finances. Lacks remorse for injurious behavior. Patient is 18 years old, not solely manic or psychotic behavior or schizophrenic behavior. So what do you think about this? I'm saying that I think many more people are going to qualify for this in the new criteria in DSM-5 than they did in DSM-4. Because you were very specific in DSM-4 of the things that they had to do, and here it's sort of a generalization as to what the things are. Etiology, lack of bonding or love in infancy or history of childhood distress. Many parents have the same disorder. Attempt to bond using power and destruction. Failure to relate results to a lack of conscience. Search for excitement. Remember reaction attachment disorder? Normally the person moves from an untreated reaction attachment disorder to conduct disorder to antisocial personality disorder. So if you've got somebody that's really acting out, as a teenager, they're probably going to have conduct disorder, but after age 18, they're probably going to have antisocial personality disorder. Notice the other part of this thing is that they don't have the feelings. That's your biggest tip-off. They did something terrible, doesn't bother them at all. And of course, these are most of your criminals. You're going to find a high probability in the jails of people that do this kind of stuff. Treatment. Well, the earlier you get them and help them, the higher the probability. Unfortunately, with reaction attachment disorder, if they're not treated before age 11, the suggestion is they may not be treatable at all. Once an adult, there's no specific intervention that's very effective. 70% left treatment prematurely. Some challenging and vigorous wilderness programs that require the individual and group commitment have improved self-esteem, self-confidence, and interpersonal focus. So a lot of these wilderness deals might be able to help them because you're forcing them to work with other people in a good way. The next one, which is probably one of the biggest ones that you're going to see, is borderline personality disorder. 1.6 to 5.9%, marked instability in self-image, mood, and relationships, impulsive and self-destructive, conflicting, contradictory, and generally paradoxical behavior, moods, and inclinations, ambivalent about relying on themselves or others for reinforcement, or whether it is positive or negative, cutters, self-mutilation. Criteria: pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and effects, and markedly impulsivity, beginning in early childhood and persistent in a variety of contexts, as indicated in at least 5 of the following. Frantic attempts to prevent abandonment, whether real or imagined. This is the biggest thing you're looking for usually, besides the emotional volatility, is this fear of abandonment. Unstable relationships that alternate between idealization and devaluation. Identity disturbance in self-image and sense of self. Impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially damaging, such as spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. Where do you also see that? A manic episode. Recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, threats, or self-mutilating behavior. Suicide is very high in borderlines. Affective instability due to marked reactivity of mood. Chronic feelings of emptiness, inappropriate intense anger, or difficulty controlling the anger. Brief paranoid ideas or severe dissociative symptoms related to stress. What you see here is a person that really overreacts to everything. I've had borderline personalities. One lady broke all the dishes in her house. What we finally did is got her a punching bag downstairs so she could punching her husband. But it's just overreaction. Unfortunately, one borderline that I treated about 10 years later committed suicide. So what is the issue here and what is really going on? Etiology. Relationship problems between children and unaccepting parents. Large number of parental substitutes leading to a strong fear of abandonment. High rates of physical and sexual abuse, like 75%. Low brain serotonin activity and psychotic mood episodes due to dopamine. Close relatives 5 times more prone. Rate somewhat linked to the social breakdown and is increasing. Emotional deregulation as a joint outcome for a biological disposition and an invalidating environment. You know, that's a lot of stuff that we're saying, but basically what it comes down to, if you see people that have really been abused, many times they end up with this borderline personality, and they're all over the place, and the emotions are just huge. Treatment. The primary treatment for borderline right now is dialectic behavior therapy, which is teaching them skills of how to cope with their emotions. Very difficult because of the dependency and the anger. Difficult balancing boundaries and relationships, but significant character change is possible. Termination may be difficult. How are they going to react if you terminate? With the abandonment issues that are involved? All these different areas you can address. Self-identity, defensiveness, loneliness, and emptiness. That's another one of the big signs. They feel just very empty. There's something missing. Teach reality checking. Groups are effective. Attachment to several persons rather than one. Drugs to calm the emotions in aggressive storms. Anti-suicide, written contracts, planning reactions. Next type. The histrionic personality disorder. And this is going to be another one of those that we're going to have to be very careful of how we sort this thing out. 1.84% tend to be a deal with attention. You need to really listen to this because you're going to get confused between this and another one here very shortly. This is the histrionic. The suggestion is sustained by negative reinforcement. They avoid pain by relying on others. Needs for affection and support are an effort to avoid boredom and the pain of emotional emptiness. They solicit attention, praise, and reassurance and approval. A lady that maybe had this as an example that I had as a client, she dressed very sharply. It's a good-looking woman, right? And as she would walk into a room, she expected everyone to turn and look at her. In fact, as she was walking down the hallway and somebody was coming the other way and they didn't look at her, she would step in front of them to make sure she got their attention. So you have to think about, why would you want to get attention? Because you see that attention makes you worthwhile. You have to be somebody. This lady also was involved in beauty contests. Criteria: pervasive pattern of excessive emotionality and attention seeking, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by at least 5 or more of the following. Uncomfortable in situations in which the patient is not the center of attention. Interaction with others is often characterized by inappropriate, sexually seductive or provocative behavior. So what are you going to have to watch out for? Especially if you're a guy and you're counseling a lady like this? Especially to make some moves on you. Rapid shifting and shallow expression of emotions. This particular one are those flighty girls. Ever see something that they're just sort of like they're artificial? The way they do things, they just don't come across as real, and they're very flighty. And they have big emotional ways that they do things. They're all exaggerated. Consistently uses physical appearance to draw attention to self. Speech that's excessively impressionistic and lacks detail. Self-dramatization, theatrically, and excessive expression of emotion. Easily suggestible. Easily influenced by others' opinions and circumstances. Considers relationships to be more intimate than they really are. So to get all of that, she basically overly does everything. Etiology: cold, controlling parents. Defense against abandonment in an overly emotional manner, and invents crisis to get others to act protectively toward them. Strategy to attract fathers to meet their needs. Little girls looking for an idealized dad to manipulate and take care of them. Extreme suggestibility, lack of detail, and impressionistic style of speech due to self-involvement in emotional hunches rather than logic. Possibly an underlying assumption that they are helpless, so the only way to cope is to get others to meet their needs. In other words, I'm going to attract you to me and try to hook you in, sort of like in codependency to a certain degree, only this is going to be more excessive. It's a whole personality style of the way you operate. Treatment. They tend to seek out treatment. Bring tantrums, unreasonable demands, and seductiveness into the therapy sessions. May make artificial attempts to change to please the therapist. Help them to recognize their excessive dependency. Help them to achieve more self-reliance and independence. Change belief of helplessness. Teach problem-solving skills, reality checks. Need boundaries on dependence. Drugs are not helpful except for dealing with depression. Now here's the next one, and this one you got to be careful with again. Narcissistic personality disorder. Just see how many of these symptoms are the same as the other symptoms. Exaggerated sense of self-importance and needs constant admiration. See, constant admiration and attention can be very close, can't they? Passive, self-focused and sustained by positive reinforcement, pursue pleasure in a manner relying on themselves, overly expansive egocentrism, they seek praise, admiration, and special consideration from others, especially self-importance and self-absorption. Criteria: pervasive pattern of excessive emotionality and attention-seeking, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicating at least 5 of the following. Grandiose sense of self-importance, exaggerating abilities or accomplishments. Can you see how the one might walk in and they all want your attention, the other one walks in and says, I'm in charge, I've got it all together, I know what I'm doing. Preoccupation with fantasies of beauty. What was the other one? They were using their looks. Brilliance, ideal love, power, or limitless success. Belief that personal uniqueness renders the patient fit only for association with people or institutions of rared status. I can't have anything to do with you guys. Do you understand that? Because you just don't have it together and you're just not smart enough. Because the only people I deal with have at least an IQ of 150. Need for excessive admiration, a sense of entitlement, favorable treatment or granting of desires, exploitation of others to achieve personal goals, lack of empathy, frequent envy of others, and a belief that others envy her, arrogance or haughtiness in attitude and behavior. How many things are the same? How many things are different? You see some of the problems that we have here. Etiology: poor parental reaction causing the child to feel unsatisfied, rejected, unworthy, or wary of the world. Defend by trying to prove themselves to be perfect, desirable, and they seek the admiration of others. High risk from abused, orphaned, or adopted children. Possibly also taught by being treated in a positively concerning exterior issues. Higher, more in the firstborn and only children. Treatment: only occasionally respond to treatment, and considered one of the most difficult to treat. Have a sense of entitlement in therapy and try to get the therapist to support their view. Confront the grandiose self, identify the self-defense mechanisms, address the anger, rage, or instances of self-sufficiency, address the narcissism, give a safe haven to open up, deal with reactions to criticism, set boundaries for exploitive behavior, teach to empathize, deal with an all or nothing world. But if you think about a lot of these kind of things, what are the real issues we're going to be dealing with? Self-worth and significance and love and security. These are all based on a deficit in those particular types of areas. So treatment is going to include all of that. Now we're getting to cluster C. Anxious, tense, and over-controlled. The first is an avoidant personality disorder, 2.4%. Basically, fears of rejection. They actively avoid the pain of rejection and humiliation by withdrawal. How many of the rest of these earlier had withdrawal? Do you see the confusion in this entire area? A lot of the symptoms are the same in all of these different things that we're talking about, but yet we're trying to pigeonhole them in these different areas. Extract put-downs from every encounter. They expend energy avoiding all potential threats. Criteria: pervasive pattern of social inhibition, feeling of inadequacy, and hypersensitivity to negative evaluations beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by at least 4 of the following. Avoids occupational activities that involve significant interpersonal contact because of fear of criticism, disapproval, or rejection. Unwilling to get involved with people unless certain of being liked. Restrained within intimate relationships for fear of shame or ridicule. is preoccupied by being criticized or rejected in social situations, is inhibited in new interpersonal situations because of feelings of inadequacy, views the self as socially inept, personally unappealing or inferior to others, avoids personal risk of new activities or fear of embarrassment. Again, how much of this is the same? Etiology. Childhood experiences of shame, feeling unloved, result in a distrust of others. Experiences of strong criticism or rejection. Negative self-images justify other perceived expected reactions. Treatment. Come looking for acceptance and affection, but may later avoid sessions distrusting the therapist's sincerity. See, here again is that whole love thing, the unconditional acceptance, the whole grace thing. Treat them as a social phobia or anxiety disorder. How do you treat those? Facing their fears a little bit at a time. Help them to get out. Help them to make new friends. Deal with childhood experiences. Social skills training and exposure to social contact. Deal with negative thoughts, anti-anxiety, anti-depression. Drugs sometimes help. Group therapy. The dependent personality disorder, 0.49 to 0.6%. Deal with self-worth. Criteria: pervasive and excessive need to be taken care of that leads to submission and clinging behavior and fears of separation. What could this be confused with? How about separation anxiety and separation phobia? Beginning in early childhood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by 5 of the following. Difficulty in making everyday decisions without excessive amount of advice and reassurance. Need for others to assume responsibility for most major areas of their life. Difficulty expressing disagreement with others because of fear of loss of support or approval. Difficulty initiating projects or doing things on their own. Goes to excessive lengths to get nurturance and support from others to the point of volunteering to do things that are unpleasant. Feels uncomfortable or helpless when alone because of exaggerated fears of being unable to care for themselves. Urgently needs another relationship as a source of care and support when the relationship ends. Unrealistic preoccupation with fears of being left to care for themselves. I'll give you an example. I had a particular lady, and she had a daughter, and the husband tended to be violent, and she was so dependent on her husband and her daughter, but primarily on her mom, that her mom came over and cleaned her house. Her mom took care of her child. Her mom did everything. And of course, no one would take responsibility for anything, so dealing with the husband and the wife was very interesting of what had to be done to try to get boundaries. And what do you think happened when you tried to do anything? The mom wasn't going to go along with this, and the daughter did everything the mom wanted to do, and so you weren't going to make a lot of progress. It was a totally resistant thing that was going on. I tried to get an alliance going with the mom, and that didn't work very well either. So you just have all these things that are going on, but that's what a dependent personality disorder looks like. Etiology: over-involvement with intrusive parents. Overprotection leads to fear and anxiety over separation. Taught to be dependent. Possibly rewarded for clinging. Parents pass on their own fears. Children not given the chance to develop skills or independence. Believe that they are inadequate and helpless to deal with the world. Must find another person before they can cope. Feel they must either be all dependent or all independent. Treatment: usually approach therapy passively, wanting the therapist to take responsibility for the treatment. What are they going to try and do? Get you to become another provider for them, right? Maintain good boundaries. Treat the partner also. Watch out for transference. That means when they're relating to you like they related to their mom. Deal with feelings of incompetence and helplessness, assertiveness training, unconditional acceptance, and group therapy. Now we finally have the last one, because this is quite a list, isn't it? Obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Now please let me help you understand something. Obsessive compulsive disorder is very different from obsessive compulsive personality disorder. One of them has some really strong things. This is sort of the underlying thing that you deal with here. Listen to this, okay? Criteria: pervasive pattern of preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and mental and interpersonal control at the expense of flexibility, openness, and efficiency, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated in at least 4 of the following. Is preoccupied with details, rules, lists, order, organization, or schedules to the extent that the overall activity is lost. Perfectionism interferes with the task completion. Devoted to work or productivity to the exclusion of leisure activities. Is overly conscientious, scrupulous, or inflexible, or about morals, ethics, or values. Saves worthless items of no value or sentimental value. There's some hoarding involved here possibly. Won't delegate tasks to work with others unless others agree to do things the patient's way. Is stingy towards self and others, hoards money against the future catastrophe. Is rigid and stubborn. What's the picture look like here? A very legalistic type of person. They have to do everything in a very precise way. They have to follow all the rules. They have to do everything right. And you see, this is very different from the regular OCD we're talking about, where they're doing checking, or they're washing their hands, or they're doing other things to deal with the thoughts in their mind. But it's the same to the degree that the obsessions in their mind, by having everything controlled, by having lists and so on and so forth, they're able to cope with life easier and deal with their fears. Etiology: struggle with parents' over control, resulting in unacceptable anger, which is contained by rigid control. Copes by trying to conform. Black and white distorted thinking. Fear of punishment. Treatment: usually don't think that they have anything wrong when they come in. Develop an awareness for feelings. Overcome insecurities. Accept limitations. Learn to have fun and loosen up. Deal with black and white thinking, perfectionism, worry, procrastination, decisiveness. From a Christian point of view, we've got to move them from legalism into grace, don't we? Into freedom. Then we have personality disorder due to change to another medical condition. So you have to realize that sometimes these things might not be totally psychological. There could be effects. A person that has trauma or something, their personality can change. Ever hear of that? Here's the criteria for that one. A persistent personality disturbance that represents a change from the individual's previous characteristic personality pattern. Evidence of history exam or lab, not another mental disorder, not delirium. Clinically significant distress or impairment. Specifiers, and this gives you an idea what they're talking about. The emotional type, the disinhibited type, the aggressive type, the apathetic type, the paranoid type, the other type, the combined type, or the unspecified type. Which means if you have trauma to the brain or other things like that, your personality can change, and you'll have these other characteristics that might look like another personality disorder. And then we have other specified personality disorder and unspecified personality disorder. Now, before I go on and talk about this more, I want to talk about the alternate model for personality disorders, which is in your DSM-4 in the back. We're not going to spend much time on this, but I want to give you an overall way of looking at this. What's the idea? That there are certain different criteria or things, if we look at them, that there will be traits, and they define all of these traits, and they use these traits to define the personality disorder by looking at the different traits. Here are the general criteria. Moderate or greater impairment in personality of the self. And the self is your identity or self-direction, and interpersonal, that is empathy and intimacy functioning. One or more pathological personality traits: negative affectivity, attachment, antagonism, inhibition, or psychotism. They have 25 specific traits. So basically, you look first at the person on the self. That's the first category. And the second category is you see what pathological traits they have. And by doing that, you break out now, and they're not giving particular names, but they actually do. They've identified 6 different personality types of the ones that we've talked about here before. The ones that they actually identify with this new method are the antisocial, the avoidant, the borderline, the narcissistic, the obsessive-compulsive, the schizotypal, and another one they call a personality disorder trait specified. So they break all of these things down. Now I'm going to give you an example of that. I'm going to go back to borderline and show you how this is different. Now remember, we're not using this yet, okay? The other ones, you just go by the criteria that we had before. Borderline personality disorder. Listen how this is different from what we had before. Moderate or greater impairment in personality functioning manifested by characteristic difficulties in 2 or more of the following 4 areas. Each are rated little, some, moderate, severe, and extreme. Identity, self-direction, empathy, and intimacy. And then they say exactly what's going on in each of those areas. That's the self area. And then 4 or more of the following 7 pathological personality traits. And those are then broken into smaller areas about that. Emotional liability, anxiousness, separation insecurity, depressivity, impulsivity, risk-taking, and hostility. Now think about that and think about when I defined it earlier. Do you see how it's very different of how they're going along? But each one of those they define very specifically of what's going on in the person. So that's the new idea of maybe how to do this. And by doing that, it appears, I can't be sure, they might develop more in the future, that they've broken it down from 10 down to 6. Spec. What's our situation here? Well, can spirits be involved in this whole thing? Because these spirits and attitudes are closely related, and attitudes are very closely related to personality, aren't they? Physical. There can be a predisposition to all of these things. Most of the etiologies, though, we read were what? Looking more of things that happened to them as they grew up, of how they coped with their environment. Experiences. Inability to meet basic psychological needs. If you took every one of those and you broke them down and went back to self-worth, significance, love, and security, there's a factor there in how they're coping with those particular areas. And choice. Do they make any choices on a daily basis on these things? Yeah, everything, right? But I really see that this is an area where the whole Christian counseling really comes into play, because it's those issues of how they're seeing life and what's going in and how they're coping. The problem is, though, when you get them in counseling, what's the problem? They're pretty set in these ways. They've been living that way for a long time. And to change their picture and to change the way they react to life can be a very difficult type of thing. But from a Christian point of view and Christian therapy, what would be some basic things you would do? Deal with the core issues. Figure out what's underneath this personality and why they act the way they are. Unconditional acceptance and grace. A lot of them were dealing with what? Their fears. They were reacting to what happened to them, experiences. So what do we want to do? A theophostic ministry, right? How about faith in God? What if they believe the world wasn't as dangerous as they thought it was? Skills training and spiritual growth. But these are some of the most difficult ones, but I believe that the Christian counselor, you, are more equipped to deal with these kind of issues than most of the other secular things that you're talking about. Let's pray. Lord God, we thank you That yes, we do have a personality, Lord God, but our personality can be shaped by you and your love for us and how much you care for us. And we ask that you would give us wisdom of dealing with these kind of people and dealing with these kind of issues and help them to get to know you, that they might be changed and transformed, that these situations could be changed. And we give you all the glory and the honor in Jesus' name. Amen.
Is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way. Jesus is the